All right, here with Associate Head Coach Stephen Pearl. I guess, Stephen, man, just talk about the whirlwind, Final Four, rebuilding a team. Now you're a handful of weeks into practice. What's like the last couple of months been like?
Yeah, I mean it's been hectic. Obviously made a great run to another Final Four, and that's early April, and we had started recruiting for this new roster. We had 3 freshmen committed, we had a junior college player committed, and the only guys that could potentially return would be Todd, Chad Baker, and a Darren Scott. So obviously 2 of those guys ended up moving on, and Todd went into the process. So after the season, we really didn't have any guaranteed guys coming back on the roster. So once the Sweet 16 weekend came around, we started recruiting. We started, making phone calls, and we were doing Zooms, before and after games and before and after practices. And, from that point on, we recruited all the way from the middle of March all the way up until, the very end of May to kind of put together the roster that you see today. And it still wasn't done because we still didn't know what Todd was going to do. So, at the end of the day, we ended up, being able to bring in 3 freshmen. I want to say, close to I think 6 or 7 transfers, and obviously towards the end of the process, got really good news, that Todd ultimately was deciding to come back. So, didn't get much of a breather there at the end of the season, but all worth it when you're having to rebuild a brand new roster. And 4 weeks into summer workouts, I feel like we're in a pretty good spot.
At this point, I mean, after, I guess you've got multiple regular season championships, multiple tournament championships, now multiple Final Fours, guys in the NBA. Would you consider? I mean, it's fair to say Auburn. When you talk about Auburn basketball and college basketball, there's only a few teams that you would put in that category of what Auburn's accomplished in terms of elite. I mean, do you feel that? Do you go? I mean, we are at this point. We have to be considered one of the absolute elite programs.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the accomplishments and the achievements of this program, over the last 8 years. Like, that's stuff that Duke does. That's stuff that North Carolina, Kentucky, Arizona, Kansas, that's what the blue blood schools have been doing for obviously a longer stretch of time. But for us to have been able to do that over that time period, yeah, I feel like we deserve the respect of, being regarded as one of the top 10 or 15 programs in the country, pretty regularly over the last couple of years. To win 5 SEC championships, like I think that's harder than going to a Final Four, even though like our roads to the Final Four, the 2 times we've done it, have been 2 of the harder ones that on paper that you could really look at. But to win 3 outright SEC championships in the regular season, like that's just in two of those years, in 2019 was the SEC tournament, but obviously to do it this past season when our league was regarded as the best conference in the history of college basketball, and to do it with a week left in the season, just speaks to, the type of team that we had. But to win 3 regular season championships, to win 2 tournament championships, and then find a way to make it to 2 Final Fours, yeah, I mean, I would say, our head coach, our coaching staff, and obviously our players, over the last 8 years deserve a ton of respect to be able to accomplish that in such a great league against some really good teams.
You mentioned Todd coming back. I almost think it's understated, or people are probably still underestimating how huge that is, and like what Todd means to this team. How would you put into words what he's going to mean to a completely new team that doesn't know your culture? He's the holdover. He's the guy coming back that can set the tone. Obviously, he's extremely talented, but it's also kind of odd because he's just a sophomore. So I'm watching him out there, and it's like he's the veteran, but he's just 1 year in. Just talk about the dynamic there and what he's going to mean to this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think, based on the makeup of this team, to get your point guard back, probably your most talented player a year ago, just from a skill standpoint, if it was any other position, it wouldn't have as big of an impact as it does with it being the point guard. Obviously your point guard is your quarterback, that's your floor general. He's the one that kind of puts everyone in their spots and understands, our offense and our defense better than anybody. So to get him back, obviously with the season that he had and the momentum, that he carried into the draft process, like our practices were really good the first 3 weeks. This last week practice was just way different having him out there, and it took a step or two or three, as far as levels go, with the productivity, and obviously just, it just looks different with him out there. So it's hard to put into words how big him coming back really is for us, especially, because when you look at the options that were out there in the portal, like, there were some good players, but like there weren't any great players at his position. So, to be able to get him to come back is obviously, it's like getting the best player in the transfer portal. We feel obviously really good about it, and he's obviously going to make what we do a whole hell of a lot easier.
Kind of a random question, but watching him with Kaden, it feels like there's some similarities there, but how much will somebody like Kaden Magwood be able to grow under Todd, and Todd kind of taking him under his wing a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, they're very similar players as far as, when Todd was a freshman, what he brought to the table, and then obviously what Caden's able to do. So Caden's going to learn a ton, and, they're both going to be guarding each other every day in practice. So that's going to be really beneficial for both of them because, they're going to obviously compete every single day. And, I think Caden's just going to continue to grow and get better. I've been really impressed with his on-the-court IQ. It wasn't something that I really saw as much in AAU and in high school because he was more so just like, he was the best scorer out there. So he was out there really just trying to will his team to wins with scoring. He's asked me some pretty intellectual questions on both ends of the floor that I wasn't really expecting from him. So, I think he sees the game and thinks the game at, for a young kid at a pretty high level. So I'm kind of excited. I'm really excited to see kind of what he grows into, but being able to compete with, arguably one of the best point guards in the country next year is going to be so beneficial for him, and it's just going to help him grow into the player that, we know he's capable of being.
What are kind of some early returns on just the guys coming together, whether it's effort, whether it's just kind of understanding what they're doing, questions being asked, just kind of some early general impressions? I mean, there's so long to go.
Yeah. No, I mean, these last 4 weeks have flown by. Like, I feel like we just got them here like yesterday. And, but I mean, it's a group that works hard. It's a group that's enjoyed being around each other. They've, done team gatherings just on their own organically, not having us have to like make it, put together. They just kind of do it on their own, which has been obviously good to see because they're going to have to go through some stuff together. So it's good that they get to know each other. But it's a group that's worked hard. It's a group that's hungry. It's a group that's wanting to learn. A lot of guys have been coming in watching film, trying to, understand what we do a little bit better. Just got a couple texts from a few of the guys, wanting to spend some time in here tomorrow morning. And, I think it's just a group that's eager to be here. They're excited to be here because they obviously recognize what Auburn's become and they want to be a part of that. But I think, obviously they're ultimately all here because they want to grow their game, but also, win and play at the highest level.
I guess from a culture aspect, you bring back Todd. Everybody else is new. What are the challenges, but also maybe some exciting parts about having, all these guys sort of have to get used to what you expect and the standards, but you got this whole new group to sort of mold. I guess what are maybe the challenges, but also exciting parts about creating a new culture a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more exciting than it is challenging as far as the culture aspect because we recruited them based on what our culture is, and that's why they decided to come here. The challenging part is getting them up to speed on everything we do. Like, when you have 4 or 5 returners, it helps because they're able to help guide along guys at their position. But when you only have one guy that's returning from, a Final Four team, he can't spend all of his time trying to put all these different guys in the right spots. That's obviously why we're here as a coaching staff. It just is a lot easier when you have guys that have done it before to be able to show them, all right, this is how we do this. Well, we haven't had Todd here these first couple weeks because he's been resting since the NBA draft process. So we've had to do it as a group. And it's been a group that's picked up on things pretty quickly. So that's the challenging part. The exciting part about being able to reinvent your culture, not reinvent it, but just, tweak it a little bit. Because, when you have guys that return, they have some bad habits and, that can carry over and, affect some things. But I would say, like, most people that have been around the program know that, we've had a really healthy locker room the last, 8 years and have brought in guys that enjoy being around each other and have fun, playing the game together and have fun spending time off the floor together. So I think, with this group, we can tighten up a few things because there's so many new guys, which is for us as a coaching staff is great because we can kind of reinvent ourselves a little bit and just figure out what we didn't like about the last couple teams and what we really loved about the last couple teams, and just try and plug in more of that and try and fade out some of the stuff that we thought wasn't as good for our group. But I think overall, just the recipe that we've had with BP, the culture's never been better, and it's a reason why all these guys decided to come to Auburn.
Quick look ahead. Obviously, it seems like a long way away. It is still a long way away. But next season's schedule, I wrote about it the other day. It's like, it's almost as hard as last year's.
Yeah.
You're looking at the players era. You got Arizona, Purdue, and Houston are 1-2 maybe, and then the SEC is going to be the SEC again. Have you even started to think about what you just went through, and you're like, I might have to do it again?
No, we're going to have to do it again, because I think this year's schedule is going to ultimately be harder. Purdue, Houston, 1-2, at Arizona in a true road game. We're going to get a really good opponent in Atlanta that will come out here in the next few weeks. Our NC State is a new up and coming school in the ACC with Will Wade. They've really revamped that roster, and they're going to do a really good job. So you look at our SEC schedule. Our SEC schedule just got harder because our two-time opponents are all three teams that are going to be picked in the top half of our league. So it's obviously going to be really challenging, probably more challenging than last year, especially with having a brand new roster. So, but I think obviously it paid off for us last year because it helped us get prepared for the SEC. And it also ultimately helped us get ready for the tournament. So it's going to be, I wouldn't expect us to have the same record we did last year through the non-conference, but I think ultimately it'll be great for our team to grow as a group, as a unit, and get ready for, what lies ahead.